Blitzkrieg, July 5th to August 5th. Therefore, great king, enter our gates, dispose of us and ours, for we no longer are defensible. Henry V, Act 3, Scene 3. The following leaflet was airdropped over the American lines at Fairfield, Montana, on the evening of July 5th. White American soldiers. It's like this, guys. You know what happened at Anaconda. You know what happened to your fleet off our coast. You know what happened to the Doughboy. You know what happened to your cabinet. And you know what's going to happen to you. By now, you all understand that this is only going to end one way. America is done, and so are you. Or maybe not. Because we Northmen are such nice guys, we're going to give you a chance to live. Beginning at 0530 hours tomorrow morning, July 6, white soldiers of the U.S. Combined Military Group Center may leave your positions in safety, on foot only, and return to your side of the border, so long as you are covered by a white flag of truce every 30 or 40 men or so, and so long as you remain on the prescribed route. You get onto our Highway 12, what you call Highway 89 on your old outdated American maps, then you start walking east, and you don't stop until you cross the border at Great Falls. Remember, no vehicles, if you have any functioning ones left. You can go home, but you're going to walk all the way. You will be escorted at a distance by the men who have defeated you. You may take your personal weapons, which we suggest you turn on the people who sent you here when you get back, and any rations and water supplies you have left, but you don't take so much as a single green apple or a single drink of water from a roadside spigot from this land you came to destroy. Leave the highway. Try to take anything or molest anyone on the way. Then the deal's off and the SS moves in and shoots you down like dogs. Oh, and you leave all your nigger and Mexican buddies where they are. They're not going anywhere. Not ever again. When we figure all of you who are of a mind to live have departed, we're coming in and killing every living thing in Fairfield wearing a dark skin or an American uniform. Your choice, guys. Signed, Zachariah Hatfield, GOC, 2nd Army Northwest Defense Force. State President Red Morehouse and his SS escort arrived at the 2nd Army headquarters just outside Fairfield around 6 a.m. on the morning of July the 6th to see firsthand what the response would be to the mercy thus extended to the besieged Americans. General Hatfield led the president with his staff to an observation bunker overlooking Highway 89 that had been installed by the NDF engineers at the beginning of the siege, and together they scanned the highway over half a mile away through field glasses. The NDF artillery, which had been shelling Fairfield continually for days, had fallen silent almost 40 minutes before. We heard a lot of shouting and shooting and some explosive detonations in their trenches, all through the night over the sound of our own guns, said Hatfield. Sounded like grenades going off. We figure some of the niggers and Mexicans didn't like the idea of being left behind. Still, I wonder how many of the whites actually do love niggers and beaners enough to die for them and with them, asked Morehouse wonderingly. How many of our own will we be killing later on today? How many more white lives, snuffed out for no other reason than for the mere physical presence of these dark creatures on our continent, where they never should have come? Far more than there should be. I'm sorry to say, said Hatfield. Almost 100 years of brainwashing and social engineering has done incredible damage to the white psyche, Mr. President. Those guys over on that side of the border can't think straight anymore. Hell, they can barely think at all. We were able to break away from that 17 years ago in the Northwest, find our courage and our manhood, and pick up a rifle to start resisting it. This generation of Americans didn't, and so mentally and morally, they're worse off than we ever were in the skulls full of mush department. I know it's incredible to think that at this late date, anybody could actually still believe in liberalism. Ah, there they go. Yes, yes, whispered Morehouse, watching through the binoculars. At least some of them won't die for the Jews. Maybe there's hope they can learn wisdom yet. You've got observer teams scanning the whole route, right, to make sure they don't try to smuggle any niggers or mestizos out disguised as whites? Yes, sir, and there will be several checkpoints along the way where our men will be close enough for visual examination, said Hatfield. Aerial reconnaissance reports are coming in reporting a lot of dead bodies down there in their trenches. Looks like they had their own race war last night. They may not have left many blacks and beaners alive for us. At least there are some of them who haven't had their brains washed. In the steamy dawn, Morehouse could see a ragged column of walking men, appearing seemingly out of the churned-up earth down the asphalt of the highway, heading eastward toward the border highway in the McCurtain. They wore old Iraq war-pattern desert camouflage uniforms, and they trudged forward with their heads hung down, their arms reversed, furtively glancing to their right and left at the NDF and SS troops watching them from the ridges. A number of them were two-man stretcher teams carrying wounded. Here and there in the long, snaking column of men and a few women were white towels and bits of cut-up bed sheets on long sticks and lengths of pipe. "How many does it look like took us up on our offer of surrender, do you think, Zach?" asked Morehouse. "It's hard to tell from the air, but some of our observers in the copters think it will be as many as 40,000, said Hatfield. 40,000 disgruntled, angry, and humiliated veterans from a defeated army, quite a gift for the USA. Much better than 40,000 dead martyrs, agreed Morehouse. Eric Sellers was monitoring a handheld mini-computer, and now he stepped forward. Mr. President, General Jackson reports that after yesterday's leaflet drop, a significant number of white American troops are starting to abandon their positions in Ponderay and fall back toward Canada. "Sending them back the way they came?" asked Hatfield. "I wonder if the Canucks will welcome them as much coming back as they did when they were coming through." "Good to see you again, Colonel," Hatfield added, nodding toward Sellers. "How's Comrade Becky?" "She's on duty back to the command vehicle, sir," said Sellers, smiling at his wife's old NVA code name. "Order the attack here for noon, Zach," said Morehouse. "That's long enough for them to make up their minds. 30 minutes of full aerial and artillery bombardment, then go in and finish it." "Yes, sir," said Hatfield grimly. "I'll be in the first tank." Morehouse understood it was useless to try to dissuade him. "Don't get yourself killed, Zach," he admonished. "I'm afraid the Republic is unable to dispense with your services at the moment." "I'll try not to, Mr. President," replied Hatfield. "Once we're through here, we have to get your 2nd and Drones's 4th Army through almost 500 miles of mountains, brush, and desert, and get you positioned for the push north." "What's that?" said Hatfield as he spoke into his field phone. He listened for a few moments. "Okay, roger and out. Some of the Americans have lain down their arms and are approaching our men wanting to surrender and defect, Mr. President, which, as you know, we've been allowing for the past day or so. These defectors are telling us that the enemy general, Lyle, shot himself last night. Wrapped himself in the Marine Corps flag before he did so, apparently." "Not the Stars and Stripes?" asked Morehouse. "Toilet paper makes a bad shroud, sir," said Hatfield with a snort. "Even the Americans know it by now. Casualty summary as of July 11th. NDF military casualties, 13,980 dead, and 19,039 wounded. NAR civilian casualties, 4,202 dead, and 6,883 wounded. United States military casualties, 483,865 dead, and 127,657 wounded. United States civilian casualties, 211,654 dead, and 701,938 wounded, gassed or ill from biowar agents. Casualties overwhelmingly non-white Aztlan casualties. No accurate figures available due to complete collapse of Aztec government and society. Military and civilian casualties in first coup d'etat on July 10th, known to be extensive. On the morning of July the 12th, the combined NDF armies of the Southern Front launched an invasion into Aztlan, including Northern California, Northern Nevada, and into American Utah. These included the 1st Army commanded by John Corbett Morgan, spearheaded by the SS Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, and the 6th Army led by General Robert Bobby Bells de Bella, with the SS Division Viking attached. The terrain on the California front, on either side of Interstate 5, was rough and mountainous, hard going, but it was also sparsely populated, and there were few targets of military importance. Most of the inhabitants of these rugged rural areas were white, and they either avoided or actively assisted the NDF. On more than one occasion, the advancing Northmen came across mass graves and killing fields full of mestizo corpses, both military and civilian, who had not been slain by the NDF but by parties unknown. "It's the same thing that happened during World War II on the Eastern Front," Morehouse told his generals in an encrypted conference call via a Lazarus Bird satellite. The Wehrmacht and SS found barns and ditches full of dead Jews and communists, shot or simply hacked to pieces or beaten to death by the local people in Poland and Lithuania and the Ukraine people who had lived under the left liberal dictatorship and who had simply had enough. That's what's happening here, and I suppose we had best prepare ourselves for future historians blaming the NDF for some of these killings and calling them horrible Nazi atrocities, just like the Germans were blamed for the massacre of the Polish army officers at Katyn. The Ejército Nacional de Aztlán, the regular Aztec army, had largely fallen apart. It consisted mostly of Aztlán's actual Hispanic population, hapless Mayan conscripts, many of whom originally came from remote villages in Yucatan and Guatemala so far out in the jungle that they did not even speak Spanish, but weird ancient Indian dialects no one else could understand, including their commanding officers. The regulars were poorly armed, poorly trained, incompetently led by drunken and drug-addicted officers, were low on ammunition and supplies, and many of their soldiers did not even have boots. They had been driven north during the invasion like a herd of cattle by their officers, in some cases literally driven with bullwhips, and they were not difficult to stampede back south again. The asaltos, the assault guards, were a different kettle of fish. They were the political enforcers, the actual muscle of El Presidente or whoever turned out to succeed El Presidente once the revolts in Sacramento and Los Angeles sorted themselves out. They were armed and equipped with top-of-the-line Chinese weapons and gear, trained by instructors from the People's Liberation Army and from North Korea, and they were actually paid, sometimes even on time. They had armor and heavy weapons, including tanks and field guns and Katyusha rocket launchers, or at least Chinese Katyusha knockoffs. The asaltos were also much more politically and racially motivated. Where most of the EDE was comprised of non-English-speaking mestizos from Mexico itself or points south, the asaltos were largely Americanized Hispanics whose native language was English, and who were thoroughly indoctrinated with the principles of La Raza and left liberalism of the classic 60s and 70s variety. Many of them had been police officers under the old American regime, and that included a lot of former fatpos. There was also a stiff leavening of former gang members from Los Angeles and drug cartel hoodlums from Mexico itself. The asaltos were mediocre soldiers at best, but they were tougher and more dangerous than the regular army, and more adapted to modern warfare than the Yucatan banana pickers or Chiapas peasants of the EDE. They stood and fought in a few of the small towns of Northern California such as Crescent City, Eureka, Weed, and Redding. All of these towns fell to the NDF one after the other. In the face of combined air and artillery assault and invincible infantry, the remnants retreated southward to fight either for or against El Presidente. The NDF was demonstrating that complete control of the air worked for whoever had it, propeller or jet. Eureka and Arcata on the coast were captured by SS units in an amphibious landing. The overwhelming majority of the brown-skinned civil population fled southward to the teeming barrios of Los Angeles, Sacramento, and the Valley. The simple fact was that mestizos might make vicious thugs and gangbangers, but they were not very brave, and they simply did not make good soldiers. Even Simon Bolivar himself had always been compelled to make sure that his armies of liberation were officered by Europeans. Then, on July the 20th, the NDF advance stopped at Redding, and the invading troops began to consolidate their gains in the hundreds of thousands of square miles of Northern California they had conquered. The military expelled or liquidated mestizos, Chinese, and other people who had no business on the North American continent, while they and special political cadres from the party began to contact, assess, organize, and prepare the remaining white population of the area for assimilation into the Northwest American Republic. On the northern front, the 4th Army A.J. Drones, the 2nd Army Zach Hatfield, the 3rd Army William Jackson, and the Florian Geyer SS Division invaded British Columbia and Alberta. Jackson's 3rd Army marched on Calgary, while the other two generals began a westward drive toward the Pacific coast where the bulk of the province's population was concentrated. Drones and the 4th Army swung wide and north to capture Kelowna and Kamloops, while Hatfield's forces hugged the border and approached Vancouver after rolling over Chilliwack, entering the city through Surrey. Yet another NDF military formation, the British Columbia Expeditionary Force BCEF, launched an amphibious attack and captured the town of Victoria, as well as executing several paratroop drops on strategic points surrounding the largely non-white city of Vancouver. The Northwest Republic had 5 million men and women under arms, and they seemed determined to give every one of them a chance at some action. It was in Victoria, BC, after the sea landings, that the media first reported a phenomenon that would become very common during this later phase of the war. CNN and Fox News showed NDF tanks and armored vehicles rolling across the Johnson Street Bridge and into the city, and they were met not with gunfire or the flight of refugees, or by sullen silence and withdrawal. Instead, crowds of cheering Canadians greeted the invading Northmen. Teenaged white girls ran forward and hugged and kissed SS troopers, and people threw the marching men food and bottles of Labatt's. Generations of rule by the politically correct, breathtakingly corrupt tyrants in Ottawa who groveled before the Jews were coming to an end, and Western Canadians were overjoyed. Years of hate laws, legalized discrimination, uncontrolled third-world immigration, human rights tribunals, prison and murder and oppression were over now. The RCMP, the bureaucrats, and the mud people were fleeing in panic, and the soldiers of the Northwest American Republic were being welcomed in Canada as liberators. Fighting was harder in the Vancouver area, where Canadian troops and large numbers of Chinese and warlike Sikhs were concentrated, with their own ethnic militias. Some of the Canadian soldiers fought for their masters in Ottawa, and even fought and died bravely. Some threw down their weapons and fled. Some Canadian units dragged their feet. They arranged for crucial communications to go astray, and responded slowly and reluctantly to any order to engage the enemy. Individual Canadian soldiers crept out of their positions in the Vancouver suburbs at night by the dozens, and then by the hundreds, surrendering to the NDF, defecting and even asking to join the Northmen in liberating their land. The government of the Republic responded by doing everything they could to keep white civilian casualties low throughout Canada. In Vancouver and Calgary, no NAR gas or biological attacks were directed against the cities. Civilian authorities in the towns and countryside, who promised to remain neutral and to cooperate with the NDF when asked, for the benefit of their communities, were allowed to remain in place. Encamped NDF troops were kept in camp and not allowed to mingle with the civilian population just yet, to reduce the possibility of antagonistic incidents. On the other hand, the Northmen showed no mercy to the mud-colored immigrants who had swarmed over Western Canada for generations. After the blue light projectors took care of the Canadian Air Force in the same manner they'd done with the Americans, the songbirds and starfighters swarmed over the border, and the Straits of Juan de Fuca in their thousands from their airfields in Bellingham, Cedro-Woolley, and Anacortes. Like droning swarms of bees or locusts, the small, inexpensive prop jobs sometimes blotted out the sun, and the low rumble of their methane and alcohol engines mixed with the wailing of the air raid sirens became Vancouver's signature theme song. The Luftwaffe pounded the non-white sections of Vancouver without mercy for days, sending waves of mostly Chinese refugees fleeing from the city in a motley of vehicles, with their most prized possessions tied on top in standard third-world fashion. There they ran into the westward-moving NDF 2nd and 3rd Armies. Few Chinese or Hindus made it across the plains to Saskatchewan, but as with California in the south, the NDF was not responsible for the majority of the dark-skinned corpses that lay rotting in the forests and on the wide plains. The white people of Canada had suffered long, and a heavy reckoning was due. After almost a week of bombing, and also shelling from the 88 seconds and 75 seconds that surrounded the city in Surrey, Burnaby, Richmond, and Gibson, then came the rumbling and squealing treads and echoing thunderclaps of the cannon of the Rhinos, the NDF's workhorse tank. A souped-up model of the old German Tiger with plasti-steel armor, twice as strong and half the weight, capable of climbing over a Bremer wall or other such obstacle in a matter of seconds, with a special beak or ram called the Horn mounted on the front for plowing through walls or buildings or any obstruction. The Rhinos immediately seized control of the Vancouver street fighting and rendered the whole exercise simply a mopping-up operation. Vancouver was a large city, moving carefully and methodically, block to block and street to street. It took 3 days for the NDF to occupy the city and snuff out the last of Ottawa's forces. Oddly enough, Historians and psychologists later decided that it was one thing that broke the morale of Vancouver's pro-Ottawa defenders more than anything else, and led them to drag their feet and then lay down their arms. This was the news, which was never mentioned at all in the state-controlled Canadian media, that virtually the entire Jewish population of Vancouver had already been evacuated from the city. There had been rumors to that effect before the NAR attack, of course, since people could hardly help noticing when their Jewish friends, acquaintances, and co-workers mysteriously disappeared. But now everyone knew why. The rats had deserted the sinking ship, and they had left the Goyim to fight and die for them. Everyone knew it, and in the back of every Canadian soldier, policeman, or citizen's mind who wanted to resist, the nagging sense of betrayal and what the fuck simply would not be laid to rest. The invaders were immeasurably assisted in their task with intelligence and support provided by NVA Commandant George Magas and his small unit of about 60 men and women, the last active unit of the Northwest Volunteer Army in existence. After the Longview Treaty 12 years before, most of the Canadian NVA had gathered. One day in November, at the White Rock border post, they shouldered arms, and to the sound of their own bagpipers, they had marched south into the new Northwest Republic and gone on with their lives. Magas and his holdouts had elected to stay in their homeland and fight on. There had been almost 200 of them at that time. They were never officially decommissioned or ordered to disband, which was always a sore point during the rare diplomatic exchanges between Canada and the NAR, but they went underground. Down through the past 12 years, the Ottawa regime had never had things all their own way in BC, thanks to the Vancouver Brigade. Bombs had gone off, politicians and officials had been assassinated, acts of sabotage had occurred, Chinese and Indian property had burned in the night. The RCMP and assorted left-wing death squads acting for the Ottawa regime had ruthlessly hunted the brigade's cells, and many had died or had to be spirited south into the Republic when the heat became too great. But the Vancouver Brigade had never given up. It was the Vancouver Brigade who lynched the city's Bengali woman mayor, Indira Vishnamurthy. One of her own white staffers betrayed her as she fled down the shell-blasted ruins of 12th Avenue, seeking to escape from the advancing Northwest tanks. She was dragged screaming back to the Vancouver City Hall by a squad of NVA guerrillas, where she was stripped naked in retaliation for her similar treatment of a white woman suspected incorrectly of racism some years before. Then she was hanged from one of the windows over the portico. Her dangling body swung over the classic Art Deco entrance to greet the first NDF troops at the City Hall. She was still swinging there as Minister of Security Frank Barrow pulled up in an armored personnel carrier to assume official control of the building and whatever remained of its contents. With Barrow was his blonde and Canadian-born wife, former NVA Captain Jane Chenault, who was now the Senior Permanent Secretary for Education, essentially the senior civil servant working under the cabinet minister for that department. For the duration of the war, Jane had reverted to her reserve military rank of colonel, and she had promised her husband that if she were not allowed some role in the conquest of Canada, their future married life would be something to make him shudder, like all wise husbands who know when their wives really mean it. Frank gave in immediately. Jane was proud and pleased to discover that her statuesque figure could still fit into her old Kevlar vest from her NVA days. Greeting them on the steps of the City Hall were Commandant George Magas, a small and nondescript man who looked like a schoolteacher or possibly a shoe salesman. Sometimes he had talked his way out of tight corners simply based on his appearance alone, surely. Someone so mild and inoffensive-looking could never be the terrorist mastermind who had almost single-handedly kept a war going for 12 years. With Magas were about 40 of his people, men and women dressed in civilian clothes and carrying weapons slung over their shoulders. Magas stepped forward and saluted Barrow, who returned the salute. "Vancouver Brigade reporting that this building has been secured, sir," he said. He looked at Jane. "You guys sure took your time, eh?" "Yes. We're 12 years late," said Jane, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, George. We had to do what we did. There wasn't any other choice." "Well, you're here now, Janie," said Magas. "I just wish Mark was around to see it." Mark Chenault had been Jane's first husband, an NVA man who one winter's night was murdered on a cold and rainy street in Vancouver by the notorious CSIS secret police agency. "He's here with us in spirit, comrade," she replied. On July 28th, the NDF crossed over the northern border of British Columbia into Alaska. Ketchikan fell the same day, and on July 31st, the state capital of Juneau was captured by a combined assault force of SS paratroops and NDF line units who crossed the Gastineau Channel on pontoon bridges thrown up by the engineers, as well as on hundreds of small boats piloted by local white people, in a kind of reverse Dunkirk. Resistance was minimal, and Juneau went down almost without a shot. The governor and some of the state legislature had already fled to Anchorage. Other legislators remained in Juneau and received the invaders on the State House steps. 12 of them, then and there, renounced their allegiance to the United States, and the rump session formally applied for Alaska's admission to the Northwest American Republic. The United States concentrated what troops they had at Fort Wainwright around Anchorage, while the governor spent hours every night on live television, babbling long quasi-Churchillian rants about fighting them on the beaches and in the fields and the mountains, so forth and so on. He was rather obviously drunk most of the time. Then the northward offensive halted as well, and the NDF dug in and began to establish the foundations and infrastructure to bring what Canadian and Alaskan territory had been overrun into the Republic. The decision to halt the advance during the 7 Weeks' War was one of the most passionately debated issues ever to confront the NAR's government and its citizens. To this very day, there are angry and stubborn people in the Republic who remain convinced that it was a mistake, and that the NDF should have marched onward until white rule had been completely restored over all 49 of the old United States of America, with a naval assault on Hawaii planned for later. In a speech to Parliament on the 4th day of August, just before the armistice, President Morehouse explained the rationale behind what had been done. In his memorable address, Morehouse said in part, "For many years, back in the days when our movement was nothing but a few isolated individuals playing with their personal computers, we debated among ourselves the pros and cons of the whole idea of territorial separatism for our race in North America. Long after the whole idea was clearly impractical and impossible of attainment, there were those among us who insisted that somehow we could achieve the old dream of an all-white United States of America, from sea to shining sea, an America permanently frozen in the idyllically perceived past of the 1950s, or 60s, or 70s, where Beaver Cleaver with his plaid shirt and his cowlick plays with Marcia Brady the cheerleader in her bobby socks, in an endless suburb of tract houses with 2 cars in every garage, backyard barbecues, church on Sunday, and nary a single gibbering black or brown face to be seen or a single gabbled word in pidgin Spanish to be heard. That was a beautiful dream," Morehouse went on. "Please understand that I do not mean to mock it or the small group of elderly, people among us who may remember the tag end of it. It is a good thing to retain some fleeting childhood memories of a better way of life. But that dream is gone now, and lest we forget, even when it partly did exist in reality, it was based upon the American destruction of Germany, on our slaughter of millions of our racial brothers and sisters in Europe, and on our handing over untold millions of people of all races to the brutal and bloody sway of world communism, which was Judaism in disguise. Today, we are again faced with this issue, this dream of somehow taking back the whole of the United States for our race," Morehouse continued, looking out over the rows of parliamentary deputies. "Again, it was and is a noble dream, yet we still must accept that it is only a dream. That is so much harder now, because now we contemplate the future not as a small band of eccentrics with computers, but in a time of glorious victory and power, when it seems that we are invincible and the world is ours to command. And this is the most dangerous time of all for us, for make no mistake, my comrades, my fellow citizens, my folk, we could still lose this war. Let me tell you how. The first reason I will give you as to why we must cease our advance and be content with what we now have will sound the weakest of all. It will sound crass and petty, and in a sense, it is, but it is nevertheless insurmountable. It is true that we have millions of men and women under arms. They have been victorious on all fronts, and they have added vast expanses of territory to our homeland in a period of a few short weeks. But never forget the salient fact that compared to the rest of the world's community of nations, the Northwest Republic is poor, dirt poor. Our taxes are the lowest of any developed nation, and we use our resources to provide for our own population rather than export and sell them abroad. One of the reasons we have been forced to develop our very people themselves as human weapons for our defense is that we simply cannot afford to engage in a high-tech arms race with the rest of the world. The 5 million or so people we now have in uniform are almost all reservists, who sooner or later must return to their jobs and their lives here in the Republic, or else the country will begin to suffer damage and deterioration from their absence. They cannot be used as an army of conquest and occupation for an expansive territory the size of North America. Such a lengthy occupation is unsustainable and would eventually destroy us if we attempted it, just as the United States with all its power could never successfully occupy Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, or even tiny Gaza. If nothing else, such an undertaking would simply bankrupt us, and it would destroy the inner human and moral fiber of the nation we have begun to build here in the Northwest over the past 12 years. Morehouse paused in his speech and then went on. The second reason we cannot and must not attempt to win back the entire North American continent, even from a position of crushing victory such as we now enjoy, is the same one we faced back in our computer game days, only this time in reality. There are now approximately 150 million non-whites of various kinds in North America. What are we going to do with them? No, I mean really, what are we going to do with them? Kill them all? Chase them out? Load millions of niggers into cargo holds on ships, take them over to West Africa, and dump them all on the beach? Chase every Spanish-speaking mud person back south of the Rio Grande with guns and clubs? What will we do, really? Before, all this was simply theoretical. But now that the white man does in fact have some military force at his command, we have to examine seriously the logistics involved in all these options that we casually tossed around back in our computer game days. I won't speak to you of moral considerations, since in view of the terrible damage and destruction these creatures have wrought, there can be no question but that we have the absolute and unshakable moral right to remove them from North America however we can. But this is not a moral problem, it is a technical and logistic one, and realistically, it is almost as insurmountable as it was back in the computer days. True, 5 million soldiers sounds like a lot, but in addition to occupying and administering huge cities and immense territories, how exactly do we use them to exterminate or drive out 150 million people? And how many white people will be killed during such an open race war as we would ignite? There are so few of us left that any further depletion of our gene pool, through senseless violence, urgently needs to be avoided. We are experiencing logistic and administrative problems enough in assimilating Northern California and Southwestern Canada, and that alone is a project which is clearly going to take many years. I won't belabor the point. We could kill some of the muds and frighten others out, true. But what we would end up doing is simply making one hell of a mess that would do more harm to the continent's remaining white population than even the continuation of the present situation. Finally, Morehouse went on, we seem to forget that we still have powerful enemies, and there is in fact a rest of the world whose opinions and interests we cannot simply ignore. For example, we have received immense help from the Commonwealth of Russia during this past crisis. Support which has sealed the bond between our two countries begun at our nation's founding stronger than ever before. But would that bond be so strong when we are no longer defending our own lives and land, but are stalking across the continent leaving piles of black and brown corpses as we go? The enemy media and intellectual elite are going to spend the next century accusing us of committing atrocities during this war, and some of the things we have done, such as the use of gas and biological weapons, probably fall into that category, yes. But it is crystal clear to anyone, and it will remain crystal clear to anyone no matter how the lefty libs obscure things in the future, that we were attacked first, and that we were defending our very existence as a nation. But will that distinction be as clear-cut if we invade the United States itself and attempt to conquer them and cleanse the land of racial contaminants? Morehouse asked. We also need to remember that even though they have been defeated in the field, there in fact remains a United States government and a United States ruling class, a ruling class which is still extremely wealthy and which still commands the shattered remains of a United States military, including the nuclear missiles in those silos in Kansas and Minnesota and North Dakota. A brave young woman sacrificed her life in order to stop those missiles from being fired at us by a deranged man. But if we persist in threatening the power and the wealth of the soulless men in suits who still rule the United States, if we make it clear that we're going for their throat, and that they have no chance for personal or financial or political survival, that we mean to take everything away from them, not just their condos in Seattle, but their summer homes on Long Island, and their winter mansions in Palm Beach as well, their money and their power and all that makes them who they are, then the doors to those missile silos will open again. The current American administration, as corrupt and full of hatred for us as it is sufficiently practical not to want to carry the can for contaminating the entire northern hemisphere with radioactive fallout and being responsible for the death of millions of people, mostly their own, President Morehouse told them. We must now show the same kind of pragmatism. It is said that war is only politics by other means, and that's true, but politics is the art of the possible. This is a strange kind of mad, mutually assured destruction. The United States of America and the Northwest Republic can destroy one another right now, they through their nuclear missiles and we through our troops and our ability to instigate total race war of the kind that will make the USA ungovernable and cause their society, already stumbling and battered, to collapse completely. Now is the time for both sides to back off and settle up. I will be speaking tomorrow with the American President Hugh Jenner. Don't worry, comrades. I won't be giving away the store. The Northwest Republic is due a healthy slice of the spoils of victory, and we shall have it. On the morning of August the 5th, the two sides finally met, if that is the word for staring at one another on huge wall-sized plasma screens. The two presidents and the two war cabinets, one set in Washington, D.C., and the other in Washington State, were connected courtesy of a Russian communications satellite. Hugh Jenner still had his arm and foot in a cast. The men and women who around him in the Pentagon Situation Room, the one in the White House had been demolished, were people whom he had dragooned in to fill the places of the slain secretaries and staff members and administrators. They were second-raters and time servers, politicians and hacks and bureaucrats, because those were all he could get to take jobs that had proven highly hazardous to the health of those who held them. They huddled like Armani, clad sheep, quailing beneath the cold and homicidal stare of the Northwest Republic's assembled government, mostly bearded men but a few women as well, every one of them including their state president wearing the uniform that bore over the right jacket pocket the eagle and swastika emblem that once more struck terror into the world. "My God, it's like looking at a Roman legion," muttered Carl Nelson, the new vice president of the United States. Jenner cleared his throat. "Mr. Morehouse, I would like to—" "Shut up, Hugh," said his old enemy, Finance Minister Ray Ridgway. "Is that Annette standing behind him?" Jenner wondered. God, she grew into a beauty, didn't she? "Our boss is going to talk, and you're going to listen. He's going to tell you how things are going to be, and you're going to agree because you don't have any choice." Red Morehouse spoke without formal salutation or courtesy. "If this goes on, your government, your military, and your whole society are going to bleed out. We both know it. This isn't just military defeat. It's not just that we destroyed your ships and your aircraft and your first-line soldiers. It's that you can't replace them. We didn't just defeat your armies, we defeated you, all of you. Both of us know this, Jenner, so let's have a moratorium for once on arrogant Americans swaggering and boasting. To quote those African Americans you people claim to love so much, right now you niggas ain't shit. Don't bother to threaten us with nukes unless you're genuinely suicidal," Morehouse continued. "Yes, I know, you do still have that final ace up your sleeve, just like we have our phosgene and our anthrax. If that's the way you want it to play out, we can go that route and everybody dies. Whoopee. Yeah, you can open your football and finish giving those codes Hunter Wallace started reading out a month ago. And I can give an order and have everybody on Pennsylvania Avenue choking to death in their own lung fluid in 10 minutes. Let's take all that as read. Now, here's the deal," he said. "Tell your Mexican buddies in Los Angeles when they stop squabbling and sending each other to the firing squads that we're taking all of California north of Redding. The Aztecs can have Redding itself, because my people down there tell me. It's a shithole and not worth having. We'll be nice guys and we'll also give the Aztecs back what we took of Nevada, its useless desert full of nothing but armadillos and scorpions. and it's not worth maintaining a garrison there. We don't want Las Vegas. If we got hold of it, we'd shut it down. You're also giving us Juneau, Alaska, and the surrounding Pacific coastal islands. The rest of Alaska you can keep if the people there will let you. We're in touch with the Free Alaska movement, and we have guaranteed their right to opt either for full admission into the Republic or independence, whichever they choose. I believe they're planning a plebiscite on their state's future sometime in the next couple of months. They will have it, and it will be free and fair. Who knows? The voters may decide to stay with the United States. You guys can campaign and use your wonderful democracy. You can bribe and horse trade and do all your little electoral monkey shines. But if there is any attempt to use force to interfere with the election or to rig the results, then the NDF goes up there and works you American assholes over. Remember, we don't need the oil. We don't use that much of it. Morehouse went on. Now, speaking of our northern exposure, I will be informing Prime Minister Simoneau that we get all of British Columbia and Alberta below a line running more or less between Edmonton and Prince George. If the Canucks want to say fuck it and just throw in the northernmost sections of those provinces, fine. I don't know what use we can make of tundra and caribou, but what the hey? And what does the Canadian Prime Minister have to say about that? Jenner managed to interject. If he didn't want to lose part of his country, he shouldn't have helped you dogs attack us, said Morehouse. The Canadians have been needling us and trying to undermine the Republic for years, dancing to the Jews' tune. He and his government need to learn that what goes around comes around. We will negotiate a separate peace with Canada, but I don't anticipate any problems. They know full well we can pop the top on our little toys in Toronto and Montreal and Ottawa just as easily as anywhere else. We have enough Canadians on our side who have faced the human rights tribunals who would volunteer to do it in a heartbeat. You will be receiving by email a complete copy of the draft peace treaty terms. I will appoint one of our permanent undersecretaries from the Foreign Ministry to deal with any quibbles you have, but I wouldn't bother if I were you. He's just going to say no. You have 1 week. Otherwise, we assume it's still on, and we send battalion-sized flying columns deep and wide into the United States to see what kind of racial turmoil we can stir up. You don't seem to have sufficient military forces left to stop us. We can pretty much stroll in anywhere right now and do whatever we want. Morehouse leaned forward. Now, there is one demand of ours that is non-negotiable and which you will fulfill immediately. Or by God, sir, we won't stop coming at you until the NDF is marching down Pennsylvania Avenue, he said. You have someone of ours in a freezer locker at the FBI morgue. At least you better pray that you still have her there, because if you have destroyed the mortal remains of Georgia Myers, some very bad things are going to happen. We want her back. We made her a promise, and we're going to keep it, even in death. That girl is coming home. You will arrange through the Red Cross to hand her body over to us at the Helena border post within 24 hours. Tell the Red Cross to contact Major Gustav Hallstrom, the Civil Guard commander in Helena, when her coffin arrives. He will arrange for DNA testing to make sure you're not trying to play one last chicken shit game with us. Fuck with us on this, Jenner, and I promise you that I will have your balls cut off. The screen went blank. The 7 Weeks War, June 19th to August 5th. NDF military casualties, 18,765 dead, and 24,765 wounded. NAR civilian casualties, 5,112 dead, and 7,387 wounded. United States military casualties, 541,435 dead, and 170,766 wounded. United States civilian casualties, 274,707 dead, and 733,654 wounded. Aslan casualties. No accurate figures. International Red Cross EST, 1 million. Canadian military casualties, 8,654 dead, and 6,987 wounded. Canadian civilian casualties, 287,782 dead and 130,355 wounded, casualties overwhelmingly non-white. Decorations: United States, Congressional Medal of Honor, All Services, 57 Army Distinguished Service Cross, 118 Navy Cross, 12. Air Force Cross, 18 Silver Star, 212. Decorations: Northwest Defense Force, all services. Knight's Cross, 30. Iron Cross, 2,147 Inc. Eli and Thomas Horikova, father and son, and Hamish and Margaret M.C. Dowell, husband and wife. Legion of Honor Civilian, 290. Decorations Canada. Victoria Cross, 3 Cross of Valor, 7 Decoration for Bravery RCMP, 10. On a hot afternoon late in August, an official NAR government sedan pulled up in front of a house in Missoula, Montana. A subaltern opened the car door, and a tall and handsome middle-aged man with a beard, dressed in an NDF general's gray uniform, got out and walked to the front door of the house and rang the bell. Millie Campbell answered the door. She and Jenny Stockdale had just arrived back from Crater Lake, along with the children she and her fellow mama bears had been teaching and guarding during the war. "G'day, Mrs. Campbell," said the man, his accent still Australian despite the many years he had spent in the Northwest. "I'm General Charles Randall of the War Prevention Bureau." "Yes, I know who you are. I've seen you on television," said Millie, her heart climbing into her throat in fear. "Is it about my husband?" "Yes, but don't worry, he's all right," Randall assured her. He looked behind her, saw Jenny standing there, and smiled. "Jen, long time no see." "Good to see you again too, Charlie," said Jenny, genuinely pleased. "I was pretty sure you guys were the ones who abducted my brother." "You say he's all right? Is he back in the country?" "Yes, and he'll be here in a bit, but he had something he had to take care of first," said Randall. "This visit is something we owe you and your family, Mrs. Campbell," he said, turning to Millie. "I was responsible for your husband's absence during a very critical time in your lives. It was very important, actually vital, as you'll hear. I think I owe you an explanation, and since the whole Republic and the world is going to know this story, I think it's right that you hear it from me and from Robert first. May I come in?" At that moment, Bob was in fact across town, along with Betsy Paris, who had accompanied him on the long and complex trip across the continent and through the battle lines. He had just delivered Allura Myers to her new family. She now sat in her mother's old playpen, which had been resurrected from the attic. She was playing with a music box, banging it on the floor and trying to sing. Bob had no choice, he told Clancy Myers, Kevin Myers, and Kevin's wife Tamara of George's death, baldly and simply, with no details spared, and no attempt to whitewash or exculpate his own role in events. "To say I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover it," concluded Bob miserably. "I failed you. I promised I would bring your little girl home." "But you did," said Clancy, looking at the baby Allura in the pen. When Campbell finally returned to his own home, he was surprised to find General Randall already there, and relieved in the extreme that Randall had told his wife and Jenny Stockdale where he had been and what he had been doing. He wasn't sure Jason and the Horikovas would believe him. At least now he had witnesses to back him up. "I just have one question," said Millie later when they were finally alone. "Just one?" asked Bob with a chuckle. She pointed at Richie's tattoo on his forearm. "Who the hell is Lila?" The sky was almost black on the afternoon they buried Georgia Myers on Mount Sentinel. Her grave overlooked the university grounds, and from its foot one could just barely glimpse the roof of the house on Daly Avenue where she had lived as a child, and to which she had so longed to return. This was as close as she would ever get now, but her daughter would live and grow to womanhood there. Lightning flickered and thunder rumbled distantly in the sky above, as the long procession wound up the hill on the road that had been specially cut and graded by the NDF engineers, following the horse-drawn caisson that bore the casket. The mourners were headed by the state president of the Northwest Republic, along with many civil and military dignitaries, as well as the family of the dead woman, as well as honor guards from the SS and the old NVA Association. Bob was there in full Civil Guard dress uniform. Betsy Paris wore a black dress with long sleeves that discreetly covered her tattoos. George's sister-in-law, Tamara Myers, carried her little daughter Allura up the hill in her arms. The solemn child clutched her Raggedy Ann doll. She did not cry. At the sight of the open grave with its white marble obelisk, the pipes and drums and band of the Northwest Scots Guards sounded Molendinar. The speeches were few and short. Clancy, Bob, Kevin, Jenny, and President Morehouse each said a few words, but there was little to say. The subject was too great a one for words. Morehouse actually said only 3 sentences. "We have kept our promise to you, comrade. Thank you, from all of us. We will not forget." On the coffin were the Northwest tricolor and the black beret and leather gloves of a Northwest volunteer. By unanimous vote of the old NVA Association, Georgia Myers had been awarded posthumous membership in the Northwest Volunteer Army, the only person ever so honored, before or since. The 12-man firing party was provided in equal part by both the NVA and the SS. The former volunteers fired weapons that had actually been used in combat by Northwest volunteers during the War of Independence, thus establishing a permanent tradition. Before the coffin was lowered into the rocky soil, the tricolor was removed and folded and handed to Clancy Myers. Allura would receive it when she came of age. The rain that threatened all day did not come until the evening, after the crowd was gone, and only the eternal flame on the white marble slab pierced the darkness. It hissed and sputtered in the rain, but did not go out. The flame and the long forks of Montana lightning in the big sky illuminated the words on the stone. "Home is the sailor, home from the sea, and the hunter home from the hill.